Hello, children. Today we are going to do the poem A Legend of the Northland by Fob Carey from the class 9 English textbook Beehive. First, let me read the poem stanza wise. Away, away in the Northland, when the hours of the day are few, and the nights are so long in winter that they cannot sleep them through. When they harness the swift reindeer to the sledges when it snows, and the children look like bears' cubs in their funny, furry clothes. They tell them a curious story. I don't believe it's true, and yet you may learn a lesson if I tell the tale to you. The poem is a narrative set in the backdrop of the cold region of Northland, far, far away, close to the North Pole. It is a place where the sun shines for a very short while and the nights are extremely cold and dark. Winters are so long that it is difficult to endure them. The winter nights are long and bitterly cold, and it is difficult for people to sleep at night. It is a land where the first moving reindeers are harnessed to the sledges when it snows, and the children, wrapped in their furry woolen warm clothing, look like bears' cubs. A strange tale is narrated in that region of severe cold and long winter. The story is quite famous and has been passed on through generations. The poet does not believe the story to be true, yet is tempted to share it. The poet is hopeful that he will be able to convey an important lesson of life, and that is why he wishes to narrate it. Once, when the good Saint Peter lived in the world below and walked about it, preaching just as he did, he came to the door of a cottage in traveling round the earth, where a little woman was making cakes and baking them on the hearth. And being faint with fasting, for the day was almost done, he asked her from her store of cakes to give him a single one. Now let me explain you. The story is about Saint Peter and his interaction with an old lady. Saint Peter was the prime disciple of Jesus Christ. Christian Church honors Saint Peter as the first head of the church. Once, when Saint Peter was on his usual round of traveling and preaching, he felt tired. He chanced upon an old cottage where a little woman was making cakes. She was baking them in the fireplace. Saint Peter was almost feeling very weak, as he had not eaten a morsel for a long time. He asked a woman to give him one cake to eat from the pile that she had baked. Now the next stanza. So she made a very little cake, but as it baking lay, she looked at it and thought it seemed too large to give away. Therefore she needed another, and still a smaller one, but it looked, when she turned it over, as large as the first had done. The woman started to bake a small little cake for Saint Peter. When she had finished baking it, she looked at it and felt that the cake was too big to give away. Her stingy and selfish nature prompted her to bake another one, which was even smaller. But again, when she had finished baking it, she looked at it, and this was the cake. Again, seemed too large to be given away for free. Then she took a tiny scrap of dough and rolled it flat and baked it as thin as wafer, but she could not part with that. For she said, my cakes that seem too small when I eat of them myself are yet too large to give away, so she put them on the shelf. The woman then took a tiny bit of dough and rolled it out as thin as she could. With this dough, she baked a cake which was as thin as a wafer, but the woman could not give even that to Saint Peter. She told him that her cakes felt too small when she ate them herself, but when she had to give them away, they appeared too large. Saying this, she placed even the thin wafer on the cell because she was too greedy to part with a single morsel of food. Then good Saint Peter grew angry, for he was hungry and faint, and surely such a woman was enough to provoke a saint. And he said, "You are far too selfish to dwell in a human form, to have both food and shelter, and fire to keep you warm. Now you shall build as the birds do, and shall get your scanty food by boring and boring and boring all day in the hard dry wood." The uncharitable and greedy behavior angered Saint Peter. He was tired and hungry. Being a saint, he was a man of compassion and charity, and her selfishness was enough to provoke him further. He told the woman that she was too greedy to live in human form and enjoy the comfort of food, shelter, and a fire to keep her warm. He cursed her and said that henceforth she would build her nest like the birds did and would have to work extremely hard for food. Even then, she would get only a tiny morsel to eat. She would have to live in the forest and search for scant food in the jungle by boring all day in the dry and hard wood. Then up she went through the chimney, never speaking a word. And out of the top flew a woodpecker, for she was changed to a bird. She had the scarlet cap on her head, and that was left the same, but all the rest of her clothes were burned, black as a coal in the flame. And every country schoolboy has seen her in the wood, where she lives in the trees till this very day, boring and boring for food. After St. Peter's curse, the little woman wept up through the chimney without uttering a single word and changed into a woodpecker. As she went up the chimney, all her clothes were burnt in the fire. She turned black as coal, and her red cap was all that remained on her head. This was the red plumage of the woodpecker. Since then, she has been seen in the forest, where she lives by boring and boring the dry wood in search of food. Hope, children, you understood the poem.